Hello my friends, Grim here. I hope you're well today. Thank you for joining me for what will be the first in a 3-part video series detailing what an endgame Fanaticism Zealot Paladin looks like. This video will focus entirely on the Paladin's gear, including charms, because that is the point of the build on which we need to spend the very most time. Part 2 will cover everything else, including stats and skills and mercenary choices and all that good stuff, and then Part 3 will be a thorough and extensive gameplay video, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those other 2 if you have not already done so, and without any further ado, let's talk about this guy's gear. Alright, so for a quick overview, we have a Grief and a Phase Blade for our main weapon, Guillaume's face socketed with for the helm, Highlord's Wrath as our amulet, a Phoenix in a Sacred Rondash for the shield, a Fortitude and a Balrog skin for our armor, Laying of Hands as the glove slot, Ravenfrost in ring slot number 1, String of Years for the belt, a rare ring with Mana Leech and many other important factors, but Mana Leech is completely mandatory with this particular setup, and War Travs for the boots. So 5 of the 10 items I just rattled off are pretty clear best-in-slot options in my opinion, and the other 5 are what I consider to be best-in-slot, but there is more debate and discussion and alternative takes that you'll encounter. Let's begin by talking in detail about why these first 5 ones are locks, and no better place to begin on that front than with Grief, which is the most overpowered weapon in the game, arguably, certainly the most overpowered melee weapon in the game, and that's even not factoring in proportionality to cost. And when you consider just how cheap Grief is compared to a lot of the other strong runewords in this game, there is absolutely no comparison. Grief is the best item that a Fanaticism Zealot can use, and it is the first expensive item that you should build. If you don't have a Grief, get a Grief ASAP. Grief should absolutely be made in a Phase Blade, and don't worry about finding a superior one, because the most important stat on Grief for our purposes, and the reason why it's so powerful generally, is the increase to flat damage. That ranges from 340 to 400. My version is near perfect at 397. So not only is that astoundingly powerful, it's also not something that scales with the percent increased damage meaningfully that you'll get from a superior Phase Blade. So if you have one, sure, don't go out of your way for one. It's really not necessary for an optimal build at all. For other classes and other builds, the increased attack speed on Grief is also of extreme import. For us, it's not. In fact, my Paladin has the lowest possible roll of 30. Out of a maximum of 40. Why? Well, because with Fanaticism maxed out, and with Grief made in a Phase Blade, you are already overcapped on increased attack speed before, even with the lowest possible roll of Grief, before you even factor in the IAS of Highlord's Wrath and Laying of Hands. So the extra points on increased attack speed are absolutely superfluous, not necessary for a Fanatic Zealot. Life After Kill, therefore, becomes the second most important mod. We have 14 one-off of Perfect, and then, just for good measure, just for style, this Grief also has one-off of Perfect to enemy poison resistance. G-Face is the best-in-slot helm because you simply cannot replicate the power of 35% Crushing Blow and 15% Deadly Strike with any other option. And while this helm is primarily a vehicle to apply those affixes, every other trait is great too. 30% faster hit recovery is actually our only FHR source on this build, and it takes us right up to a breakpoint. 30 is a breakpoint for Paladin, so G-Face by itself jumps you up to a respectable level of FHR. Enhanced defense is obviously pretty nice for a melee character, even though defense is not that important overall. Then plus 15 to strength is wonderful, and of course, it can be socketed. In this case, I have chosen to run with an rune. These 15 to all res bonuses overcap this paladin and allow me to squeeze more damage out of my charms. I don't need to dedicate more than one of my many small charm slots to any resistance in any form because of Guillaume's face getting us over the line. So once you're at a certain level of power with this build, the more damage the better, and getting resistances in the helm so that you can get more damage out of your charms is far more efficient and effective than whatever damage boost you could seek to apply from some other rune, in my opinion. Highlord's Wrath is kind of a strange one because it is clearly best in slot, and yet not as good as it might look for this build at first glance. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, obviously, everything on paper looks wonderful. Attacker taking lightning damage, it adds lightning damage, you're getting a bonus to all skills, increased attack speed, 35 deadly strike, 35 lightning res, what's not to love? Well, the problem is, attacker taking lightning damage of 15, adding 1 to 30 lightning damage, these are things that don't scale with our build. They're just kind of mediocre add-ons. They definitely don't hurt, they're definitely cool, but they're not anything that meaningfully moves the needle in terms of our damage production. And then as mentioned before, we're already overcapped, we're already attacking at the fastest possible attack speed before we even add Highlord's Wrath to the equation. On top of that, Zealot Paladin doesn't care all that much about plus to all skills. Of course, any character in this game wants that, any character in this game benefits from that, but some benefit a lot more than others, and we are not high on the list of characters that scale well with skill bonuses. That's why we're not running any skillers in our inventory. So what's the big attraction to Highlord's Wrath? Well, it is that 4th and 5th line. Lightning resistance 35, that's really nice, and it would be kind of hard to replicate without taking damage away from this build elsewhere, and then 35% deadly strike. In terms of just sheer power, sheer damage, sheer DPS, deadly strike, crushing blow. We've got him on Guillaume's face, and we've got him here, or we've got one of them rather here, on Highlord's Wrath. Ravenfrost is an incredible ring for any melee character because Cannot Be Frozen is absolutely mandatory, especially when, like this build, it doesn't teleport. So it's mandatory for keeping your mobility high, but more important than that, it's mandatory for keeping your DPS high because when you're frozen, your attacks slow down too. So if we believed in the power of Cannot Be Frozen, but otherwise found Ravenfrost to be mediocre, we could have chammed Guillaume's face and then found another sweet rare ring to apply here. But in the case of Zealot, Ravenfrost is actually incredible. Not only Cannot Be Frozen, Cold Absorb 20, that's really nice, makes cold elemental damage basically redundant in conjunction with our relatively high health pool, our relatively great life leech, and capped resistances, of course. Plus 40 to mana, when your mana pool was 214 beforehand and 254 after, and you're using the mana to charge around and so forth, it is noticeable. Plus 20 to dexterity, that is a perfect roll, and it's very useful and relevant here. Adding 15 to 45 cold damage, you know, applying cold can be useful at times, and of course that is a damage buff, and then a massive bonus to attack rating. We are 10 off of perfect, ranging from 150 to 250, our roll is 240. Now, the fifth and final piece that almost everybody would agree is best in slot is Fortitude for chest, and Fortitude should need no introduction, but you're talking about an armor that meaningfully enhances damage while also being an incredible defensive piece, not only from the massive defense it boasts, but also from casting that chilling armor, which is a really powerful and really cool thing to proc, and all resistances 30, which is a perfect roll, and in fact, the Fortitude as a whole is entirely perfect. I got so lucky. You can see me roll this on a relatively recent video on this very channel, but we have a perfect 15% enhanced defense base, for which we got not only the perfect all-res 30 roll, but the perfect 1.5 to life per level roll. Absolutely love to see it. The only problem with this is that it is in a Balrog skin, not an Archon plate. Now, most people will tell you, rightfully so, that an Archon plate is the best bang for your buck in terms of the lowest strength requirement and the highest defense and so on and so forth. But the problem with that is that Balrog skin and a couple others like it just look so much cooler to me. So from that small family of armors, Balrog skin is the most efficient, and I am sacrificing a tiny bit of optimization in the pursuit of aesthetics while wearing this Balrog armor, and I couldn't be happier. The roll rewarded me for the choice, what can I say? Okay, so on to slots for which there's a bit more debate, beginning with one of the least controversial ones, Laying of Hands. It's just undeniably awesome. But, you know, you look at it closely, it's like, okay, plus defense, not that big a deal. Casting level 3 Holy Bolt, not that big a deal. Increased attack speed, again, for other builds incredible. For us, it is almost completely redundant, unless you're being slowed somehow. So it's just like, if you don't have the attack speed, do you really need Laying of Hands? I still argue yes. It's kind of like Highlord's Wrath, in that it only kind of does two things that are really important: resistance and a damage boost, right? But those two things are really hard to replicate. You've got Lightning Res and Deadly Strike from Highlords, and you've got Fire Res of 50, and increased damage to demons of 350% with Laying of Hands. And of course, demons are ubiquitous in D2, including their presence among the big bosses, which this Zealot is very good at killing, thanks in no small part to Laying of Hands. But this is a little less mandatory than the things I just covered before it, and if you are feeling a little frisky, or a little bit bored with Laying of Hands, or that you can find a better way to use the slot, blood-crafted gloves will be your best bet. Find a godly pair, or indeed craft a godly pair of those, and then you might be onto something. Now for the belt, I am a staunch advocate of String of Ears for this build, and you will see other guides or other players advocating Verdungo's Hardy Cord or Nosferatu's Coil. Verdungo's, we'll begin with that. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's really, really strong, but it does not boast any life stolen per hit, and as we go through the rest of the build, you'll see why we need life stolen per hit. So even though Verdungo's is great, and even though theoretically you can have sufficient lifesteal with other slots, for my purposes, we need lifesteal from the belt, therefore Verdungo's is out, and it is between Nosferatu's Coil and String of Ears, and Coil is again a very, very strong option overall, but it's yet another piece that boasts redundant attack speed. If you don't need that 10% increased attack speed at all from Coil, then you're left with life stolen per hit, but at a lower possible cap than String of Ears by 1. Slows target by 10%, 15 to strength, 2 to mana after kill, and a -3 to light radius. So the -3 is bad, 2 to mana after kill, not necessary when you see the rare ring that we're wearing. 15 to strength is great. I don't really care about slowing target by 10% very much, although that is a powerful and interesting affix. So you're basically pairing off those two things against better lifesteal on String of Ears, much better defense, physical damage reduced by a maximum of 15, -1 off of perfect, and magic damage reduced by 15, which is a perfect roll. So all in all, String of Ears is more simple, it's more straightforward, and it gives you the highest amount of life stolen per hit and the highest overall amount of damage reduction. So for this build, it is the perfect fit in my opinion. Our rare ring is called Skull Coil, and the first thing you might notice about it is that it is not a much vaunted dual Leech ring. Why? Well, it has all sorts of incredibly powerful affixes, but if you were to find this exact ring with an additional line of text with life stolen per hit, it is going to cost more than this entire build put together, probably, and this is not a cheap build. And with the damage output that you reach with Grief and Fortitude and the Phoenix we haven't even talked about yet, in addition to everything else, 8% life stolen per hit from String of Years is actually perfectly sufficient. The only time you're at risk of dying is if you are not life stealing. If you're like against physical immunes that are really powerful, like Bloodlords that are wrecking you, and you're not able to break the physical immunity, and you're getting lit up by Gloam, something like that. But as long as you're actually leeching with this build, 8% life stolen per hit is enough. So if you don't need a dual leech ring, and instead you only need a mana leech ring, which is necessary because you'll just be running out of mana all the time if you don't have it, because you use a lot of it charging around and then some of it zealing as well, then, you know, if you just are looking for a mana leech rare ring with a bunch of other great stuff, the world is your oyster. You can find incredibly powerful options like this for a tiny fraction of the cost that a dual leech ring with similar overall power would run you. This one in particular is a Zealot's Dream. We've got +9 to minimum damage. As we get into the charms, and as we mentioned with Grief, it is important to remember that these flat bonuses to regular damage, not to elemental damage, just to regular min or max, that is what this build and its skills really scale with. So +9 to minimum damage is sick, +106 to attack rating, 6% mana stolen per hit, cold res 12, poison res 29, and 15% better chance of getting magic items. We are wearing War Traveler as our boots, and it is a very nearly perfect example of them. I'm so happy with this. I'm so pumped about it. You might ask, though, why not Gore Riders? And Gore Riders are actually highly viable as well, but since we're wearing Guillaume's face, we don't have as much need as we otherwise would for the Crushing Blow, Deadly Strike, and Open Wounds, 15, 15, 10 respectively, of Gore Riders. In fact, if Guillaume's face didn't exist, Gore Riders would probably be mandatory. But because we're wearing G-Face, you reach somewhat diminishing returns. It's just a little bit of overkill, basically, with Gore Riders. And in my opinion, the War Traveler G-Face combo is better than Gore Rider plus whatever the second best helm you could come up with would be. And War Traveler is not just a Magic Find boot, although it is best in class at that. It also gives you additions to damage, defense, strength, vitality, and attacker takes a bit of damage. All of this stuff does add up, even if it's not overall as powerful of an attacking offensive boot as Gore Riders are. But we've got the perfect 50 MF roll, we've got the perfect 10 Thorns roll, and we've got one off of perfect with the enhanced defense roll. So absolutely awesome. War Traveler is my choice for the boot slot, but I definitely don't blame anybody for wearing Gore Riders, especially if your build is not yet complete. Final piece of gear to cover is Phoenix. I almost said Herald of Zakarum because Herald was what I was using before. It was the last thing I upgraded, and I was not sure for a long time that it would even be an upgrade, because Phoenix is a little bit harder to grok. Herald is just so straightforwardly awesome for a Zealot. 2 to combat skills, and then 2 to all skills, faster block rate and increased chance of blocking, bonus to attack rating, enhanced defense, 20 strength, 20 vitality, all res 50. You can socket it. Herald is obviously awesome, and it's a very cost-effective item as well. And I wasn't sure so much about Phoenix, especially because I read some what turned out to be older, outdated threads, where something about Phoenix would interrupt Zeal, basically. I think it was casting Firestorm on striking would interrupt your Zealing. So it used to be kind of a forbidden item for Paladins, but they fixed that bug, and now it's actually best in class, I am convinced, for a Zealot. And just like a lot of the other items that we're using, it is above anything else for the increased damage boost it gives you. And that 397% enhanced damage, which is a perfect twin to our 397 Grief, is just like the Grief 3 off of perfect. And it also represents more of a damage boost than all of the Herald of Zakarum incredible bonuses that I listed combined. It really is noticeable when you try this exact build with a high level HOZ. and then swap to a high-level Phoenix. Ours has been made in a perfect 45 all-res Sacred Rondash, which is probably second best if you had your full choice from among the elite shields relative to Sacred Targe, but really you just want 44, 45 all-res if you can. Something elite, something that's not gonna otherwise cramp your style, and aesthetics are pretty nice for all of the Paladin shields. I kinda, not gonna lie, kinda like the big HOZ cuirassed shield type of look a little bit better, gilded shield, whatever it's called, but these smaller ones have grown on me as well. And so, just to run down the list quickly, you're casting level 40 Blaze when you level up, which is super cool. You're casting Firestorm on striking, 40% chance to cast level 22. These on-hit effects aren't usually that great, but those are some pretty high rates and some pretty high levels. It's definitely thematic as well. Level 13 Redemption Aura when equipped. That's nice. It just kind of keeps you topped off as you're charging around and fighting prolonged engagements. Minus 28% to enemy fire res. 380 on this one, defense versus missile out of a possible 400, so that's above average. 50 to life, we love that. And plus 5 to maximum lightning res and plus 10 to maximum fire res. So those two lines in conjunction with Fortitude buffing your cap to maximum lightning res by a further 5, and then the Paladin's ability to invest spare points once your main build is completed into resist lightning and resist fire means that you get really, really high resistance caps on this build. It's just another cool thing about it. And of course, all res 45 is mentioned, and 16 fire absorb to round this out. We talked about cold absorb, how good that is with Ravenfrost. Ditto here with Phoenix. It is a very noticeable difference with and without Phoenix, specifically in Travancore. You're just tanking the Hydras all day, don't even notice them. Alright friends, so on to the charms. I'm gonna uglify my stash a little bit just to break them up into different categories, but first, you know the drill with Geeds, Hellfire Torch, and Annihilus. In this case, I have 1 off of Perfect with the Annie, a 2019 10, and 2 off of Perfect with a 2018 Torch. Both are sufficient with all res to cap my resistances in conjunction with everything else I'm doing, and of course, unlike with my Druid and with many other builds, every attribute point is helpful with a Paladin. Plus to strength, even if it's over what you need for gear, is going to increase your damage output. Dexterity, even if it's over what you need for gear, can increase block rate or attack rating, chance to hit, that type of thing. And of course, even energy is useful when you have such a low mana pool, those points add up. And vitality, as always, is king. Alright, so I've got all the small charms broken up by function, basically, and the first one's really simple. It's a Cold Res and Life small charm. Cold Res, you just need a little bit of a boost in addition to the main gear to get you overcapped. It's 19 to Life, 1 off of Perfect, and a Perfect Cold Res of 11. So just about any build in the game can benefit from life-resistant small charms, right? But the other 3 categories that we use are something that is more unique to melee builds. Basically, we have attack rating / life or magic find small charms in a small amount. We have maximum damage, attack rating, and life small charms in a greater amount, and then we have the greatest amount of max damage, attack rating, magic find small charms. So to begin with the steel small charms of sustenance or good luck, 36 is the cap to attack rating, and then you can roll up to 20 to life. This one has 15. And we have a 33-7, 7 being the cap of magic items. On the small charm of good luck, we've got another 33-7 as well. So these ones are actually pretty powerful when you're first starting to build your inventory in earnest. They're a lot cheaper than the other options as well. And the reason for that is that they don't have that flat maximum damage boost, and thus, once your attack rating is not terrible, they're not as useful for scaling your endgame build into the stratosphere as the other 2 categories are, but they're very good to start out with, and for now, at least, I still have a few good examples of them rounding out my inventory. Next category is the Fine Small Charms of Vita. These are the classic 3 20/20s as the best possible roll that trade for just stacks and stacks of bears, because they're so rare and so desirable. My best examples here are 3 to max damage, 19 to attack rating, 16 to life, and even these were definitely not cheap. I've got 2 of those. I've got a 3/17/16, a 3/14/19, a 3/15/16, a 2/19/20, and another 2/19/20. Now, these 2/19/20s might look impressive, but max damage is the most important roll. Obviously, these are still great. 2 to max damage, 19 to attack rating, 20 to life, all from a small charm. Don't sleep on it, don't sneeze at it, but they are just a little bit less valuable than you might expect relative to even some of the lower rolled ones with 3 max damage. But either way, these ones are kind of the backbone of the charm inventory. And if you don't care whatsoever about Magic Find, you could fill the whole inventory with these Fine Small Charms of Vita, but for those who do, Fine Small Charm of Good Luck steps into the breach, and these are probably a little bit less expensive than the Small Charms of Vita, and for me, you know, they do go a little bit further than the Fine Small Charms of Vita as long as you're not having issues dying, which if you're not, as good as life is, why not have some Magic Find in there as well? So 3/27 is the best possible Fine Small Charm of Good Luck. You're looking at a 3/19/7, one off of perfect, and a couple 3/26s. These are my best versions of this type of charm, also running with 3/18/6, 3/19/6, 2/18/6, 3/18/6, 2/26, 3/19/6, 3/17/6, and 2/19/7. And just to round out the full gear discussion, we obviously rock a belt full of full rejuves with slot number 4 dedicated to Scrolls of Town Portal, allowing us to keep Tomes of Identify in the inventory instead of Tomes of Town Portal without taking up too much unnecessary space. I like having 4 slots open so you can pick up a series of gems, runes, small charms without having to open the inventory every time. Or if you haven't done that yet, or if you've moved stuff to the cube, of course, you can take the helms and the pelts and so forth, things that can be very valuable and are worth identifying, but 99.9% of the time will be identified and then promptly tossed back on the ground. So once you're survivable enough that you're not chugging pots 24/7, this is my preferred setup. And just to briefly, once again, review the gear, we've got Grief in the main hand, Fortitude on the chest, Phoenix in the offhand, G-Face on the helm, Highlord's Wrath around the neck, Ravenfrost, and a rare Mana Leech ring on either finger, Laying of Hands on the hands, War Travelers on the feet, and String of Ears around the waist. Thus concludes our tour of an endgame geared Zealot Paladin. I hope you guys enjoyed this. As mentioned, part 2 of this mini-series will have all of the other things you're probably wondering about: skills, stats, mercenary, etc. And part 3 will have a lot of gameplay. So thank you for joining me. Leave your comments below, give us a thumbs up, please, if you're so inclined, and I will talk to you soon. Take care. See you next time.